Ladies and gentlemen, let us descend for a moment beneath the surface of the everyday dramas of love. The text messages unanswered, the dates abruptly cancelled, the warmth that cools without warning. We are here to speak not merely of vanishing men, but of the deep psychological forces that shape the mysterious rhythm of connection and withdrawal. When a man shows love, genuine, heart-stirring love, and then vanishes, it may appear as betrayal or manipulation, but the truth is often far more complex. Concealed in the hidden architecture of his psyche, what we see is the disappearance. What we do not see is the confrontation with the shadow. You see, the act of loving another is not simply an emotional gesture, it is a revelation. Love pulls open the veil of the persona, the social mask, and exposes the vulnerable soul beneath. And for some men, this exposure is unbearable. To offer love is to offer one's true self, even if only for a moment. And that moment can be terrifying, because in showing love, he has touched something real in himself, something unpracticed, unknown, perhaps even long buried. And when that inner truth is touched, the shadow awakens. The shadow, that repressed part of the psyche, holds all that he has not reconciled: fear of inadequacy, fear of engulfment, unresolved wounds from the mother, the specter of past betrayals, the terror of not being enough. Love opens the door to these inner phantoms, and if he is unprepared, he runs, not from you but from himself. This is the vanishing, a retreat not from affection, but from the encounter with his own depth. It is an escape into solitude to avoid the reckoning that intimacy demands. And yet there is a paradox. For the same man who disappears may crave love deeply. He may long to be seen, to be held, to be known, but only in the daylight of the persona, not in the shadows of the soul. And so he returns with hope, but vanishes again when the old fear arises. It is not malice that drives this cycle, but unconsciousness. So, what are we to do with this truth? First, we must not take the vanishing personally. It is not a reflection of your worth, but a revelation of his inner conflict. Second, we must see love not as a transaction, but as a crucible, a space where two people meet not only each other, but their own hidden selves. If he is to stay, he must awaken. He must walk consciously into the forest of his fears and face the beasts that dwell there. No one can make this journey for him, but should he choose it, he may return no longer a boy running from his wounds, but a man capable of loving with the full weight of his being. And for those of us who wait for men, for partners, for ourselves, to awaken, let us do so with compassion, but also with clarity. Love does not mean rescuing another from their darkness. It means standing in your own light, steady and true, so that if they ever choose to rise, they know which way to go. Love in its truest form is not merely a sentiment passed between two people. It is a force that penetrates the surface layers of our being. When a man expresses love, genuinely, vulnerably, without calculation, he does something profound. He lowers the mask that he wears in everyday life. That mask, or persona, is the social identity he has crafted over time. It's the version of himself that is acceptable, that is competent, that is strong or charming or independent. This persona is necessary for functioning in the outer world. It protects him and enables him to navigate complex social structures, but it is not the whole of who he is. The moment he steps into the territory of real emotional intimacy, the boundaries of that persona begin to blur. Love does not respect the polished surface. It demands truth. And in that demand, love begins to act like a mirror, one that reflects not just the flattering self-image, but the deeper self that lies beneath. This deeper self is often unacknowledged, even unknown, and is composed of all the elements he has suppressed, ignored, or rejected in order to maintain the integrity of the mask. These elements form what psychology has come to understand as the unconscious. Within this unconscious lie the man's true fears, unmet needs, and unresolved wounds. Many of these were formed early in life, often through relational experiences that taught him that certain feelings were dangerous or unacceptable. He may have learned that vulnerability is weakness, that emotional dependence is shameful, or that being seen too clearly invites pain. These lessons do not disappear with age, they simply burrow deeper, hidden behind the cultivated facade of adult life. But when love enters, these hidden parts stir. They begin to move beneath the surface, activated by the presence of someone who truly sees him. In this way, love acts like a key that opens the door to the unconscious self. It does not merely open the heart, it opens the entire psyche, and while this may sound poetic, it is also deeply unsettling. The exposure is not only to the beloved but to oneself. He begins to see himself more clearly, not just the parts he likes or has mastered, but the parts he has long tried to forget. He may feel emotions that are unfamiliar or overwhelming, the ache of dependency, the terror of abandonment, the longing to be nurtured, the fear of losing control. These feelings threaten the coherence of the persona. The strong, independent, logical man may suddenly find himself longing for reassurance or feeling inexplicably jealous. The calm, rational communicator may find himself paralyzed by the fear of saying too much or being misunderstood. These experiences seem to contradict the image he has maintained for years, and this contradiction creates psychological tension. The unconscious rises like water through cracked stone, disrupting the image he has of himself. The more authentic the love he experiences, the more profound this disruption becomes. In most cases, this confrontation with the unconscious is not conscious at all. He doesn't sit down and reflect, I am being called to face my inner child, my unmet needs, my shadow. Instead, he feels anxious, uncomfortable, perhaps even suffocated. The emotions become intolerable, not because they are irrational, but because they are unfamiliar and unprocessed. The unconscious self, long exiled, is now at the gates, asking to be acknowledged. But to do so would require dismantling parts of the identity he has built, and that is a terrifying proposition. He may find himself withdrawing, not because the love isn't real, but because it is too real. It reveals him to himself, and that revelation is destabilizing. He may retreat into work, distractions, emotional silence, or even physical distance. To the partner, this can appear as confusion, betrayal, or inconsistency, but internally, he is grappling with a psychic earthquake. The man he thought he was, the man who could control, plan, and maintain emotional order, is now face to face with a version of himself he never intended to meet. This is why love is not simply about compatibility or chemistry. It is a psychological event. It invites, sometimes demands, an encounter with the unknown self, and that encounter can either lead to transformation or withdrawal. The man who vanishes after showing love is not always manipulative or cruel. Often he is simply unprepared. He has not developed the internal capacity to withstand the pressure of authenticity. He is unskilled in navigating his own emotional landscape because he has never been taught how, or worse, he was taught to avoid it at all costs. The cultural scripts given to many men discourage emotional depth. From early childhood, many are conditioned to equate vulnerability with weakness, to prize autonomy over intimacy, and to solve emotional distress through action rather than introspection. As a result, when love breaks through those defenses, they are left without a map. They feel lost in a territory that their upbringing has told them does not even exist. And so, when the unconscious self is revealed, the impulse is not to explore but to flee. In this fleeing, the man tries to restore the equilibrium of his persona. He may convince himself that the relationship was too much, too fast, or not right. He may rationalize his retreat with logic or blame, but beneath those justifications is the truth: he touched something real in himself, and it scared him. Not because it was wrong, but because it was unfamiliar. The real reason he vanishes is not that he doesn't feel love, but that he does. And in feeling it, he also feels everything within himself that love illuminates. That illumination is not always welcome. It requires emotional strength, psychological resilience, and a willingness to confront the parts of oneself that have long remained hidden. Without this inner readiness, love becomes not a sanctuary but a threat. It disturbs the illusion of control and reveals the chaotic, tender, human mess beneath. And unless he is prepared to face that mess, to allow the unconscious to become conscious, he will continue to vanish. Again and again, each time love calls him to go deeper than he knows how. When a man disappears after showing love, it can feel like a calculated betrayal, as if he intended all along to offer connection only to retract it without warning. But what appears on the surface often disguises a far more intricate psychological reality. His departure, though deeply personal in its effect, is rarely personal in its origin. The truth is, he is not running from the person he just showed love to. He is retreating from an internal confrontation with himself, a confrontation triggered by the very act of loving. Love, especially when it is deep and sincere, is one of the few forces strong enough to activate buried content in the psyche. When a man allows himself to love, he opens the gate to vulnerability, exposing parts of himself that he typically keeps protected. These are not just emotional reactions, they are inner psychic movements. They stir elements of the unconscious mind that have long been suppressed or denied. These may include childhood wounds, unmet attachment needs, fear of dependence, or a fundamental belief that he is unworthy of being fully seen and still accepted. This exposure feels threatening because it destabilizes the identity he has worked hard to build. That identity, the mask or persona he wears, is crafted to function in society, to appear competent, in control, emotionally self-contained. It gives him a sense of safety and predictability, but when he feels real emotional intimacy, when someone sees past the persona and into the truth of who he is suddenly vulnerable not only to another person, but to himself. He begins to feel emotions that conflict with the image he has spent years trying to uphold. These emotions can feel like a tidal wave. A sense of tenderness may appear along with dependency, fear, jealousy, longing, shame, feelings that don't fit neatly into the identity he presents to the world. And when these feelings are triggered, he does not necessarily understand them. He may not even have the language to describe what is happening inside him. What he does feel, often quite intensely, is discomfort, a kind of psychic tension that seems to come out of nowhere but overwhelms him nonetheless. At this point, the relationship itself becomes the symbolic site of this inner conflict. Being close to someone, being seen, touched, emotionally available, these acts become intertwined with this discomfort. He might start to associate the other person with the source of his inner instability. In truth, the other person is only a mirror, reflecting what is already inside him. But to the man who has never consciously engaged with his inner world, the distinction is not obvious. All he knows is that he feels increasingly unsafe, not physically but emotionally, existentially. He is not running from her. He is trying to escape the emotional discomfort that arises in the wake of vulnerability. And the only tool he knows for re-establishing control is distance. Physical distance, emotional withdrawal, avoidance. All of these become strategies for restoring a sense of self he can manage. In Disappearance, he believes he is returning to safety, even though what he is actually doing is evading the deeper psychological growth that love is inviting him into. This is a kind of regression, a retreat from a higher state of emotional complexity back into a lower one. In psychological terms, he is moving away from integration and toward fragmentation. Love brought to the surface parts of himself he could not reconcile with his current identity, and rather than undergo the painful but necessary process of integrating those parts, he abandons the entire situation. The relationship, in this case, becomes a casualty of internal resistance. Often, this pattern repeats itself across multiple relationships. Each time love gets too close, the same unconscious mechanisms are triggered. The man may tell himself he just hasn't found the right person, or that timing is off, or that he needs more space to be himself. These rationalizations serve as a defense against the truth, that he is not running from others, but from the emotional labor required to meet himself fully. The more intense the love, the stronger the inner confrontation, and the more likely he is to flee. This phenomenon can also be seen as a conflict between two opposing drives: the drive for connection and the drive for self-preservation. The drive for connection pulls him toward emotional intimacy, shared vulnerability, and psychological closeness. It satisfies a deep human need to be known and accepted, but the drive for self-preservation pulls him toward autonomy, control, and avoidance of emotional chaos. These two forces can coexist peacefully only when a person has done the internal work to hold emotional complexity without being overwhelmed. For the man who has not done this work, love becomes threatening not because it is wrong, but because it is too much. The tragedy is that this inner conflict is often invisible to others. The partner who is left behind experiences only the withdrawal, the silence, the confusing shift from warmth to coldness. They may internalize the rejection, assuming they were too much, too emotional, not enough. But the reality is, they have touched something in the man that he has not yet made peace with. Their love exposed a fracture in his inner world that he is unwilling or unprepared to confront. What makes this more complex is that the man himself is usually not aware of what he is doing. He doesn't have a clear map of his inner world. His withdrawal is not always calculated or conscious. It is often a reflex, shaped by years of psychological patterning and emotional defense. He may genuinely believe he needs space, or that something is wrong with the relationship, not realizing that the real issue lies within him. This lack of awareness prevents him from seeing the pattern for what it is: a self-protective escape from emotional exposure. The withdrawal after love, then, is not rejection of the other, but rejection of the emotional upheaval that love brings. It is the psyche's way of reasserting order in the face of what it experiences as chaos. Love destabilizes the ego, not because it is destructive, but because it is honest. It refuses to accept partial presence. It calls for wholeness, and when a man is not ready to meet himself as a whole being, with his fears, wounds, longings, and contradictions, he vanishes, not because he doesn't care, but because he cannot yet remain in the presence of what love reveals. Within the intricate landscape of human psychology lies a profound concept that often goes unnoticed in everyday conversations about love and relationships: the shadow. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves that we do not acknowledge, the hidden or repressed aspects that we keep locked away, often because they evoke feelings of shame, fear, or pain. For many men, this shadow holds unresolved fears and wounds that significantly influence how they experience intimacy and connection. Understanding the role of the shadow is crucial to grasping why some men vanish after showing love. The shadow is not merely a collection of negative traits or flaws. It is a vital part of the psyche that contains everything we have disowned in ourselves. These disowned parts can include anger, vulnerability, dependency, jealousy, fear of abandonment, and deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. These are emotions and impulses that many men have been conditioned to suppress, often from early childhood. Societal and familial expectations frequently teach boys to hide their softer feelings and to present a facade of strength and self-reliance. Over time, these suppressed parts of the self do not vanish, but instead become buried in the unconscious, forming the shadow. When a man shows love, particularly in an authentic and vulnerable way, he inadvertently stirs this shadow. Love invites intimacy, and intimacy invites transparency. It calls for a meeting not only between two people but also between different parts of the self. The loving gesture can awaken the shadow, bringing to the surface the fears and insecurities that have been carefully hidden. This awakening can be profoundly unsettling. For example, the shadow may harbor the fear of being unworthy of love, or the anxiety that intimacy will inevitably lead to rejection or abandonment. These fears can stem from early relational wounds, perhaps experiences of neglect, betrayal, or emotional unavailability in formative years. Such wounds leave imprints on the psyche that shape how a man approaches closeness. When love makes these fears visible, the shadow reacts defensively. This defensive reaction is not a conscious choice but a protective mechanism. The shadow seeks to shield the ego from emotional pain by triggering withdrawal or avoidance. The man may feel an unconscious urge to distance himself from the source of this pain, the intimate relationship, even if that source is simultaneously the source of deep affection. This internal conflict creates a paradox. The desire for connection exists alongside the impulse to flee. Jealousy and shame, common components of the shadow, also play significant roles in this dynamic. Jealousy may arise not only from insecurity about the partner, but from the shadow's fear of losing control or being emotionally vulnerable. Shame, on the other hand, stems from the internalized belief that certain feelings or needs are unacceptable. When these emotions surface in the presence of love, they can provoke intense discomfort. Because these feelings are deeply buried, the man experiencing them often lacks the tools or awareness to process them healthily. Instead, the shadow's influence may lead to behaviors that confuse or hurt the partner. Disappearing, emotional withdrawal, mixed signals. These behaviors are not acts of cruelty but expressions of the internal turmoil caused by the shadow's unrest. Importantly, the shadow's influence extends beyond individual fears and emotions. It can also encompass unconscious patterns inherited from family dynamics and cultural conditioning. For example, if a man grew up in an environment where emotional expression was punished or devalued, his shadow might contain a powerful resistance to vulnerability. Similarly, cultural norms that equate masculinity with stoicism and emotional control reinforce the repression of the shadow. This repression creates a disconnect between the conscious self, the persona that is presented to the world, and the shadow which lurks beneath the surface. Love threatens this fragile balance because it demands authenticity and the integration of all parts of the self. The shadow resists integration because it is associated with pain and disapproval. To allow the shadow into the light of consciousness requires courage and psychological maturity. When a man is not ready or equipped to integrate his shadow, the awakening caused by love becomes overwhelming. He may feel as if the ground beneath him is shifting, as if the very foundation of his identity is shaking. In this vulnerable state, his instinct may be to vanish, to retreat into solitude or emotional distance where the shadow can remain hidden. This withdrawal is a defense against the painful confrontation with the parts of himself he has long avoided. However, the shadow is not an enemy to be defeated or ignored. It is a reservoir of untapped energy and potential growth. When acknowledged and integrated, the shadow enriches the personality, bringing depth, authenticity, and wholeness. The man who learns to face his shadow can love more fully because he is not running from the parts of himself that love reveals. This journey toward integration is neither quick nor easy. It demands a willingness to confront discomfort, to feel emotions that may have been suppressed for years, and to question long-held beliefs about self-worth and relationships. It also requires the support of compassionate relationships where vulnerability is met with acceptance rather than judgment. The vanishing after love, therefore, can be seen as a symptom of the shadow's resistance. It is a moment when the inner conflict between the desire for connection and the fear of exposure reaches a tipping point. Until the man can embrace his shadow and the complexity of his inner world, this cycle may repeat, leaving both him and his partner in a pattern of closeness followed by withdrawal. Recognizing the shadow's role invites a more compassionate understanding of why men sometimes disappear after love is shown. It shifts the narrative from one of blame or rejection to one of psychological struggle and growth. It calls attention to the inner battles that must be faced before love can be sustained and deepened. By engaging with the shadow, a man gains access to parts of himself that enhance empathy, emotional richness, and resilience. He moves beyond the surface of the persona and begins to live with greater authenticity. This transformation not only benefits his relationships but also his relationship with himself. In sum, the shadow holds the unresolved fears that are often at the heart of the disappearance after love. It is the hidden force that shapes responses to intimacy, urging retreat when confronted with emotional vulnerability. Understanding and integrating the shadow is essential to breaking the cycle of vanishing and opening the way to enduring love and connection. True connection, the kind that lasts beyond the initial rush of attraction and infatuation, requires more than just mutual affection or shared interests. It demands a conscious engagement with the self, a willingness to confront the layers of one's inner world with honesty and courage. For a man who vanishes after showing love, this lack of conscious self-confrontation is often at the root of the cycle of appearing and disappearing. The journey toward conscious connection involves a psychological process that many avoid or do not fully understand. At the core of conscious connection lies the recognition that love is not merely an external exchange between two people, but an internal dialogue within each individual. To truly connect with another person, one must first connect with oneself. This means acknowledging the full spectrum of one's emotions, desires, fears, and contradictions. It means becoming aware of the unconscious patterns that influence behavior and relationships. Without this inner awareness, the man is likely to react to love in ways shaped by old wounds, fears, and defenses rather than by genuine presence and choice. Many men have been socialized to deny or avoid deep emotional self-reflection. They are encouraged to focus on action, achievement, and outward success, rather than introspection and emotional complexity. As a result, when confronted with the intensity of love and intimacy, they may feel overwhelmed because they lack the tools to process what arises within them. The unconscious mind holds powerful forces, fears of abandonment, feelings of inadequacy, unresolved anger, that can derail connection if not brought into conscious awareness. The process of conscious self-confrontation involves the willingness to face these inner challenges rather than flee from them. It requires patience and compassion toward oneself, as well as the courage to explore uncomfortable emotions and thoughts. This is not a linear process. It often involves setbacks, resistance, and moments of profound vulnerability. But through this journey, a man develops the capacity to hold himself in the midst of emotional turbulence without disintegrating or withdrawing. When a man has developed this capacity, he can stay present in a relationship even when difficult feelings arise. He no longer needs to vanish because he understands that discomfort is a part of growth and connection. Instead of being driven by unconscious fears, he makes conscious choices about how to respond to intimacy. He learns to communicate his needs and boundaries clearly, to listen deeply, and to engage in mutual vulnerability with his partner. Without conscious self-confrontation, love becomes a mirror that reflects back unresolved inner conflicts, triggering fear and avoidance. The man may feel threatened by the transparency that love demands, seeing it as a loss of control or a threat to his identity. The habitual response becomes retreat, silence, or disappearance. This pattern can perpetuate feelings of confusion and hurt in the partner, who experiences the withdrawal as rejection or abandonment. Developing conscious connection also means recognizing the difference between projection and reality. Often, when fear arises in intimacy, it is fueled by projections, assumptions and fears placed onto the partner based on past experiences or insecurities. Without self-awareness, these projections can distort reality, causing misunderstandings and emotional withdrawal. A man capable of conscious self-confrontation learns to identify these projections, question their validity, and respond to the present moment rather than the past. Moreover, conscious connection requires a balance between autonomy and intimacy. Many men fear that closeness will mean losing themselves or becoming dependent. This fear can drive the vanishing behavior, but through conscious self-work, a man comes to understand that true intimacy does not threaten autonomy, rather, it enriches it. He learns that he can be fully himself and still be deeply connected to another. The journey toward conscious connection is also deeply tied to personal growth. It involves integrating the various parts of the self, including the shadow aspects that evoke shame or fear. This integration expands emotional capacity and resilience, allowing the man to face the complexities of relationships without fleeing. It also cultivates authenticity, enabling him to show up in love as a whole person rather than a fragmented or defensive version. Importantly, conscious connection is not about perfection or never feeling afraid or uncertain. It is about awareness and choice. It is about noticing when old patterns arise and choosing a different path. It is about being willing to be seen fully, imperfections and all, and to see the other person likewise. This level of connection requires vulnerability and trust, which can only be built through consistent conscious effort. For men who struggle with vanishing after love, cultivating conscious self-confrontation can be transformative. It opens the door to stable, meaningful relationships and reduces the cycle of connection and withdrawal. It invites them to move beyond survival strategies and into authentic presence. This process often requires support, whether through therapy, mentorship, or deep friendship, to navigate the difficult terrain of the inner world. In the absence of conscious self-confrontation, the pattern of vanishing after love may continue indefinitely. The man remains caught in the tension between his desire for intimacy and his fear of emotional exposure. Without awareness, this tension manifests as confusion, inconsistency, and ultimately withdrawal. The relationship becomes a battleground between unconscious impulses and conscious desires. Yet when a man embraces conscious connection, he transforms his relationship with love itself. He no longer sees love as a threat or a trap, but as an opportunity for growth and wholeness. He learns to carry love not only toward another but also within himself, recognizing that the deepest connection is the one he cultivates with his own psyche. This internal connection forms the foundation for all external relationships, allowing him to love not from need or fear, but from fullness and choice.